Hi everyone, my name Hưng Lee. I'm a community manager of ETH Vietnam. ETH Vietnam is kind of the blockchain community for support Vietnamese people to learn about the Ethereum technology. Today I will introduce you our speaker Julian Ma from Ethereum Foundation. Julian.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. Nice to see everyone. Hello, I'm Julian. I'm a research assistant at the Ethereum Foundation. And today I'll be speaking to you about the Ethereum Gas Market and about crypto economics in general. So I assume that everyone can see my screen now. Is that correct? Okay. Well, if you don't, that's correct. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. Whenever you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know. So the intention of today's session is to expand your developer's toolbox, which is probably loaded with lots of programming knowledge, with some knowledge that you might not see in your day-to-day. So for example, with some crypto economic game theory, some mechanism design, which are very theoretical settings, some knowledge about the gas market that may be new, some knowledge about maximum extractable value, token economics, and Ethereum in general. Okay, so first I'll introduce a bit what the Robust Incentives Group is, which is the research group that I'm a part of. The Robust Incentives Group is a research department in the Ethereum Foundation research. And we consist of various researchers, and we all do different kind of work. So for example, Barnaby, who may join us later, does some work on proposer builder separation, which is an adjustment to the Ethereum protocol. So this means that the protocol really changes, and all of the economic incentives and consequences that come with this needs to be researched well. So for example, he published an ETH research post about this. I have looked a lot into block space futures lately. These are basically financial derivatives on the gas price. These are financial derivatives on the gas price. So if you think that gas price may increase or decrease in the future, you could use derivatives to speculate on this. Okay, so for example, I've written some posts about this. So we also do some research in those kind of directions. And another colleague of ours just gave a talk at DevCon about timing games in Ethereum and how the incentives align there. So we do various research on a very broad scope of economic incentives in Ethereum, and we publish these via posts or talks, and we'd love to talk to anyone about these kind of topics if you have any questions about those as well. But for now, we'll dive into crypto economics, and we'll have a couple of these sections which are shown with a section header. And if you have it, we'll stop at the end of each section for some questions if you may have those. But now we'll start with the theoretic crypto economics first. So what is crypto economics? Well, it's best explained using a bit of an analogy. Let's say that you're a network participant and you're doubting whether you should adhere to the protocol or deviate and do something else that may not be what the protocol wants you to do. You need to make a decision, and economic incentives can induce a participant to do what the protocol wants them to do. And to create these economic incentives, we basically have crypto economics. For example, we can reward you for doing the right thing, issue some block rewards, or punish you if you do the wrong thing, for example, slashing in proof of stake. And these are powerful incentives that align people, because then what the difference is between crypto economics and regular economics is that we live in a very different environment. It's a decentralized, trustless, permissionless environment where people can be fully anonymous and may not be in it for the long run. They may not play a repeated game. And this means that we're in a very adversarial environment. So if people can game the system and make more profit in that way, they probably will. And how we then align or capture all of the incentives in this model is by assuming that people are rational, meaning that people maximize their own payoffs. They try to make as much money as they can. And by assuming rationality, we can also make sure that they make more money, or they're better off if they adhere to the protocol instead of if they do something else. So crypto economics really started with mining in Bitcoin. We'll analyze the situation using game theory, which is a field of study that studies the strategic behavior. So really, you think about what should be my strategy, or what should I do, given what other people will do. And in Bitcoin, this is you can work this out in the case where there's a fork in the chain, and you need to decide on which chain to mine. You're rewarded if your block comes into the longest chain, and an economic incentive to do so. And we can put this game into the classic way how to put it in game theory using a table. So let's say that you're a miner. You can see yourself on the left side here as individual miner, and you need to decide on what chain you're going to mine, on the longest chain or on another chain. And there are also miners which will collect as one group, all of the other miners, and they also decide on what chain to mine together. And then in the table, you can see emojis depicting the payoff or utility that you and the other miners receive from mining on a particular chain. So the first emoji corresponds to your happiness, and the second emoji corresponds to the happiness of all of the other miners. You can see that all of the other miners are, in this case, always happy because they always mine on the same chain, so their rewards will always be included. And you are only happy if you mine on the same chain as them. You see that if everyone else mines on the longest chain, it's best for you to mine on the longest chain as well. And if everyone else mines on another chain, it's best for you to mine on that other chain as well. And you cannot increase your welfare by doing something else from this strategy. And this is something that we call a Nash equilibrium in game theory. This means that there's a steady state in which incentive to deviate, because if everyone mines on the longest chain, you want to mine on the longest chain, otherwise you won't get any rewards, but you will pay for the hash power. And this holds for every player, so no player has a strict incentive to deviate. And we see that in this game there are actually two Nash equilibria. Everyone could mine on the other chain, or everyone could mine on the longest chain. So we still need a mechanism to point people towards the one that we want, and in this case that would be the longest chain. And for this, there's another field of theory called mechanism design. This is the study of the design of strategic situations, and you could see it as a way of using reverse game theory. So instead of using game theory and looking at what your strategy is, you look at the situation at hand and see what strategy would people deploy, and is this what we had in mind when designing the mechanism. And in fact, you can see that in real life situations, there are many mechanisms where the strategic situations are not really well thought out and they're bad equilibria. But we need to reach good equilibria. And it's also very important to define what good means. So let's say we have an example of an auction of an NFT. You could design these in various ways. You could have a first price auction where the winner of the auction pays their own bid. Or you could, for example, have a second price auction where the winner of the auction pays the second highest bid. And there are lots of other ways as well. You could, for example, have a reserve price or an all pay auction even, where everyone pays their bid. And this leads to different strategies of users and also to different outcomes for the auctioneer. So it's important to take this into consideration in your design. But now we'll go back to the Bitcoin mining example, and we see that we incentivize people to mine on the longest chain by the fork choice rule that we use. And in this case, we then go back to one Nash equilibrium that we designed for. So that's a bit of theory and mechanism design. And then I'd like to shift to a bit of a different subject, but very related, called shedding points. So in the situation we just had, there were only two Nash equilibrium, and it may be easy to design for this situation. But if you're developing an application or if you're playing an application, there could actually be infinitely many Nash equilibria. But how can you, in this case, still coordinate behavior? Well, I'd like to tell you a story about the art of strategy. In this book, in this series, two random people are dropped in New York, and they need to find each other without a phone or another way to communicate. And this seems basically impossible. They could meet anywhere in the city at any time. However, people still manage to do this, because even though all of these meeting places, for example, at some random coffee store at some random time, is in fact a good strategy. You wouldn't regret doing that if you knew the strategy of the other player, because you can't really do better off. There is actually a so-called Schelling point or focal point. This is a national claim that stands out for a certain way. And it turns out that a Schelling point could be meeting at the Empire State Building at noon, as the Empire State Building is seen as a very iconical building in New York. And noon is generally seen as a nice time to meet. And in this case, one national claim stands out for whatever particular reason, meaning that people can actually coordinate behavior based on this. And I'd like to show how this kind of game theory is applied in crypto. For example, with Schelling point oracles, you may have heard of them. In principle, most data lives off-chain. For example, who won a certain soccer match, what the weather is, what the time is. All those kind of things can be very difficult to determine on-chain. But a way to make arbitrary data still available on-chain is to use Schelling point oracles. So, for example, you can let users submit a value, and you pay if they submitted the correct value. So you incentivize correctness, and then you have to set a criteria for correctness. And in this case, there also, if a user is submitting the outcome of a football match, they're in principle, you just want to have the match that's correct. And in these kind of oracles, usually correctness is defined as the majority has also voted for this value. So you want to say what everyone else is saying. And it could be difficult to estimate this if you're not using a right value. So in this case, the truth could be seen as the Schelling point, as in this is the value that people will most likely submit. So I'll also submit this value because then I'll get paid. And if I don't, I'll probably not get my economic incentives. So this is an interesting point in which Schelling points are incorporated. And do note that these oracles can be manipulated and have been in the past, but it's an interesting phenomenon. So that was a bit about the crypto economic theory. And if you have any questions, now's the time. So please feel free. But otherwise, we'll continue with something about the gas market, which is probably why you came here. Okay, so why do we even pay gas in the first place? Validators already receive issuance rewards, so we don't really need to pay people to have the security, right? Why would we still pay block producers? Well, you need to give people an incentive to include your transaction. People do use some computational costs when computing transactions, so you need to reward them for that. There's a funny tweet from MEV Refund saying that he finally made it, and with a block containing only his transaction. So this isn't a case where incentives probably weren't high enough to include other transactions. Gas fees are paid as a form of DDoS protection. If there are no gas fees, there's no cost of congestion, so anyone can spam the chain with arbitrarily many transactions, eventually filling the chain up entirely. This could cause liveness issues where validators cannot be online anymore and the gossip network doesn't work. And this would be very bad, of course, because then your transaction can't get in either. And most importantly, maybe block space, which is what you're paying for when you try to get your transaction included in a block, is a commodity, and this commodity is scarce. And by economic market forces, this means that you need to pay for it. And this is what we'll study more. So why is block space scarce? It's basically arbitrarily set. We have gas limits, meaning that there can only be a certain amount of transactions in, and this gas limit is set at a particular number. And other chains may have a higher throughput, but this can be related to the choice of the blockchain trilemma, which means that you can't have decentralization, scalability, and security all at once. Even though it's not like a complete trilemma, you can improve on these kind of things. But in general, you can't have everything at once and still be secure. And Ethereum preserves the secure block space by decentralization. So we set the gas limits such that lots of validators can participate in the protocol. The requirements for hardware are very low, meaning that it's a very decentralized system. And thereby we have scarce resource block space, and the market determines the price for this block space, which in the end is the gas price that you pay for your transaction. So in effect, there are actually two gas markets, and I'd like to call them here the market side and the protocol side. It's maybe easier to start with the protocol side. It's where every operation has a fixed cost associated with it. For example, addition costs 3 units of gas and multiplication costs 5 units of gas. And these costs are hard-coded into the protocol, and they're relative to one another. So these costs never change. But then you may wonder why does the gas fee that I pay for transactions change? That's because there's a market side of the gas market where you pay ETH per units of gas that you consume. So for example, one addition, you always pay 3 units of gas, but the amount of ETH that you pay for those 3 units of gas differs per time. And this price is market determined. So this is also why your transactions differ in price that you pay. And this is very essential. It's very essential to have this distinction between the two gas markets in mind. Gas units really refers to the block space, and ETH refers to how much you're willing to pay for that block space. And an interesting part about this is that basically now all of the computational resources that you could have, RAM storage, and all of other things that you can imagine are basically crammed into a black box, and all of these things are put together, and some gas unit per operation cost comes out. And this is done so that the minimum requirements of a computer participating in the protocol are very low. But this also means that it's slightly inefficient. There's a line of research looking at whether gas units can be priced per resource. For example, that there's a different price using RAM than to using storage. Okay. So as you may have seen, this is a first price auction. When you submit a transaction, you submit how much you're willing to pay in gas fees. And if this is enough, if your transaction is included in the block, you win and you need to pay your fee. But in general, economists and game theory certainly don't like first price auctions. This is because it's difficult for a user to know what to bid. When you have a certain valuation for something, you have a certain value for getting your transaction included. Let's say it's 1 ETH. Then you don't want to pay exactly 1 ETH because you're not better off. So you may pay 0.9 or 0.95 or 0.99. You don't really know exactly what to bid. So this means people don't have a clear strategy, which makes it difficult for people to bid, which is why we in general don't like it. So we're searching for an auction mechanism where users don't have to be strategic, but they can just bid their true valuation. Introducing the second price auction. This is an auction where if you win, you post the highest bid, you actually pay the second highest bid. So let's say there's the auction for the NFT again. I bid 14 ETH, other people bid 10 ETH, 5 ETH, or 1 ETH. I win with my bid of 14 ETH, but I only pay the second highest bid, so the 10 ETH. And the beautiful property of this is that these auctions are actually dominant strategy incentive compatible. This means that your best strategy, no matter what other people do, is to bid your true value. And this is exactly what we want you to do. So this is why we call it incentive compatible. And since everyone does this, we have a Nash equilibrium where everyone bids their true valuation, which is great. But before we couldn't have a second price auction in Ethereum because miners can actually include transactions themselves. So for example, at the top of the slide here, you see the real transactions that were submitted. So for example, 4 transactions paying 10, 8, 7, and 2 in fees. But since it's a second price auction, everyone will pay 2 in fees, meaning that the profit is 8. But now a miner could insert a transaction themselves, paying 6 in fees, and thereby kicking the transaction that pays 2 in fees out of the block, thus losing some fees. But now every transaction has to pay 6 in fees, meaning that in total their revenue has increased. So in a sense, second price auctions don't really work in this setting, because still the bid that you have to place is unclear. You'll probably pay a higher bid than you're actually supposed to. And this is unique to crypto economics. This is the adversarial environment that we talked about earlier, which really sets it apart from regular economics. So a consequence of this is that we used to have priority gas auctions a lot. This setting where the second price auction is not possible at all before how it currently is, which I'll talk about a bit later. But we used to have priority gas auctions as a consequence of the first price auction. So meaning that if there's very valuable block space, for example, there is some opportunity to make lots of money, very fast bots continuously outbid each other in the mempool, continuously bidding a slightly higher gas price to get their transaction included before the other player, because the transaction can, for example, only be executed once. If an NFT is sold or 1 of 1, there's only one opportunity to get it, and you need to be first, and the second player wins nothing. And so this is studied in the Flashboys 2.0 paper, and is laid out in the graph that you can see before you. You see time on the x-axis and gas bid that the people pay on the y-axis, and the orange triangles represents one bot, and the blue circles represents another bot. And you see that as time goes on, the bids get higher incrementally. And the green star is where the auction is won, and the red star is where the auction is lost. And this means that the consequence of this and why it's bad is that lots of transactions are sent to the mempool. So there's some sort of congestion of the network. And also, these transactions that pay a very high gas bid are probably higher than just regular transactions. They are included in the block, even if they don't do anything, even if the transaction doesn't go through, they are included in the block, meaning that block space is wasted on these transactions, and that other people have to pay more gas to get their transaction included, which is, of course, a waste of resources. So a very smart way to work around this is EIP 1559, which maybe you've heard of. It's a change to how the gas market works. And in a sense, it tries to implement the second price auction that we first thought would not be possible in this setting. So up until now, we've talked about pre-ERP 1559 gas fees. And after ERP 1559, you pay your total fee, which is made up of base fee and the tip. The tip goes to the block producer for including your transaction. Remember, we need to incentivize them to include their transaction. And the base fee, which is set by the protocol, is burned, meaning that the ETH is taken out of circulation. So in this case, we still incentivize people to include your transaction instead of delivering an empty block. There's still deals protection because the cost of submitting the transaction is still real. And there's still like an economic scarcity auction because, again, the cost of submitting the transaction is still the full cost. And the base fee is dependent on how much demand there is in a given time. So if there's a lot of demand, the base fee goes up. And if there's less demand, the base fee goes down. And the goal of this is that we have incentive compatibility again, meaning users can bid their true valuation. The tip that they pay is almost always constant, and the base fee that they need to pay is simply given. So they can easily know what to bid, and they won't be too wrong doing that. This will be their best bet. But a common misconception is that ERP 1559 decreases fees, and this is actually not true. Fees would only decrease if there is more block space or if transactions take up less block space. And since ERP 1559 only changes the fee mechanism and not the amount of block space or how transactions are worked around the system, it does not actually decrease fees, although it's a very beautiful mechanism. Okay, so that was a part about the gas market. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, we'll continue to a part about maximum extractable value. which is a very hot topic. Okay. Okay, so what is MEV? Well, you may have heard of it, you may have seen it, and you may have actually been a victim of it. But MEV is a very difficult to determine or difficult to define term. It stands for maximum extractable value, meaning that other people extract value from the Ethereum network in whatever way possible. Here you see a meme about how basically everything can be MEV, and this is supposed to show that there is not a clear definition. But for our purposes, a definition is clearly not necessary, and we'll go by we know it when we see it. I'll first give a few examples of MEV. So, for example, a back run. This is where people see your transaction and they know, okay, you're going to shift prices. I'm going to trade right after you. So, for example, if you're using ETH to buy Bitcoin, and you know that Bitcoin is going to get slightly maybe too expensive if it's a very big transaction moving prices. So I'm going to insert the transaction right after you, a back run, and trading Bitcoin for ETH. A more generalized version of this is a sandwich attack, where people see a huge transaction coming in that's going to shift prices. They'll insert the transaction before and after, basically functioning as a sandwich to profit from this. And then there are also liquidations, when in a loaning protocol, if loans are over collateralized, but it appears that they may become under collateralized soon, MEV searchers or liquidators can liquidate the loan and take a small portion as a bounty for their work. So there are lots of different kinds of MEV, and these are only a very small sample of them. But we'll have a look at what causes MEV. So in general, users send their transactions to the public mempool, meaning that all of their transactions are visible by all of the nodes in the network. And these transactions leak information about the future state of the network. So for example, these huge price movements that can happen, which happens when transactions are not executed optimally, meaning that users can actually, other users can see these future states and think, okay, well, they leave a trading opportunity for me open here, so I may as well take that. And then you may say, why aren't transactions that are executed are sent later than my transaction not executed later than my transaction? This is because of the block producer side, where the block producer has full control over the transaction ordering within a block and also which transactions to include. And since these block producers are, again, rational agents, as we assumed before, they try to maximize their selfish payoff using this monarchical power that they have. And in general, maximizing block producer payoff pretty well aligns with minimizing the efficiency of your execution, meaning that you'll pay more, which money flows to the block producer, which is a form of maximum extractable value. They extract value from your transactions for their own transactions. And now I'll give a quick case study of how MEV can be used as a tool. We'll first start with liquidations, which is a common form of MEV, where, as I said before, loans are over-collateralized, but when prices move against the lender, a loan threatens to become under-collateralized. And in this situation, the loan needs to be liquidated, meaning that MEV searchers liquidate the loan and receive a small bounty for this. But this is actually a case where MEV is used for good. Loan providers are in this case not liable to any exposure, and they won't be taken advantage of, and they only pay a small price to the MEV searcher. Another case of MEV where it wasn't used as thoughtfully is with stablecoin arbitrage that libEVM talked about at ETHCC. On the open market, you could buy one DAI, so one that should represent $1 for 1.02 USDC, which should also represent $1. So a way to profit from this, because the DAI over collateralization ratio was 1.01, so you could mint one DAI for 1.01 USDC. was, for example, flash loan 100 DAI, swap to 102 USDC on Curve, collateralize 100 in USDC to mint 100 DAI on Maker, then repay the loan of the 100 DAI, and you're left with 1 USDC profit. So this is a case where there's MEV opportunity or an arbitrage opportunity, which means risk-free profit. You can hold this atomically, where MEV isn't thought out too well. So in this case, only the MEV structure benefits from this MEV, while other people actually create this opportunity. So MEV can be used as a tool, even though it's not easy, and you have to be very thoughtful about this. But know that every design should be MEV aware. People will take advantage of certain opportunities if they arise. This is again the rationality assumption. Okay, so that was a quick introduction to maximum extractable value, or MEV. There are lots of talks about this available online as well, if you'd like to learn more about that. And now I'll dive a bit into tokenomics, hoping that this could be applicable for some of you working on your own projects. So tokenomics basically concerns all features affecting the token's coin, for example, utility for users, how much is issued and to whom it's issued, how much of the token is burned or directed away, and if the token has some intrinsic value or collateralization or whatever. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list of factors in tokenomics, but I use it to study the tokenomics of Ethereum, actually. And in this case, the tokenomics of Ethereum is quite synonymously with ultrasound money, which is a meme you may have seen. It basically says that if Bitcoin has a capped supply, it's sound money. But since ETH could be deflationary or a decreasing supply, it must be ultrasound money. Okay, so the utility of ETH could, for example, be that it allows you to stake and participate in the protocol, and it also allows you to bid for block space and get your transactions included on the Ethereum blockchain. There's an amount of ETH issued per block, and there's an amount of ETH burned per block by the ERP 1559 fee mechanism again, which is actually how you get to the decreasing supply. And we see that ETH is not backed by any collateral, and that this all concerns the ETH assets. So these are the kinds of things that you could think about when designing your own token or NFT or a protocol or whatever. It's important to think about how the money flows through your system, where it ends up, and how it, for example, relates to other domains. And if you want to learn more about ultrasound money, Justin Drake just gave a talk about this at DevCon, which I would definitely recommend. And there's also the ultrasound money website, where you can see all of the statistics about whether ETH is actually deflationary on their website. Okay, so now it's time for a quick workshop. I've prepared a case study for you. So I can't actually see you at this point, but if it's a case where you have to apply some economic theory knowledge and knowledge about the presentation that I just gave. And you can do this in teams or individually if you'd like. I suggest doing it in teams. You'll have 15 minutes for it. And the idea is that there's a case and you need to find as many errors in logical thinking as you can. So here's the case. I hope that you can see this. Please let me know if it's not readable. But the situation is that there's a fork of Ethereum and there's lots of hype. People are putting their life savings into it. MEV searches are going. It's all over the media. But they plan to do things slightly differently than ETH, than Ethereum, which looks great. And each bullet point is something that they will need to change. And not all bullet points are wrong, some are right. But think about which rules are a mistake and why. And then we'll reconvene in 10 to 15 minutes and we can discuss this case. Please let me know if you can't see the case, or if you can as well.
Hi guys, can you see the case from Julian? If you see, please put one on the chat.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Hello.
Yes, a number would be a good idea. Yeah, I'll actually just change that. Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll reconvene in 5 minutes.
Các bạn ơi, chúng ta sẽ có khoảng có độ 5 phút thôi nên mọi người trả lời nhanh lên nhé.
Thank you. It's great if you could tell a bit about why 3 is incorrect. Yeah. Okay, let's just reconvene. I'd heard that some people were quite engaged, so it'd be great to hear a bit from you. Please do follow the initiative of just writing in the chat which one is incorrect. And La, if you could extend on why you think that 3 is incorrect, that would be great. So you can type in the chat or talk if that's possible. I'd love to hear it. I can't hear you now. I don't know if that's possible. Okay, thank you. If you could write it down, that would be great as well. Unless people can make sure that other people can, I don't know if that's possible. Yeah, I completely get what you mean. So you're saying that it's the 3 can't be correct because it's the market side of the price and will be evaluated altogether. And this is exactly how it goes in Ethereum. Like we talked about before, all of the computational resources are crammed together into one unit of gas costs. But here, in this new fork of Ethereum, they would actually price them all individually. And in theory, this is possible. How to do this is still ongoing research. It's called multidimensional gas pricing or multidimensional ERP 1559. So in theory, it is possible, but indeed, this is not how it currently works. And I'm curious to hear, so thank you for your input. I'm curious to hear if other people or the same person has seen some of the mistakes in that the new fork would have made if they launched with these changes. But thanks for your input. Very nice. Is 6 also incorrect? You're rewarded for some of the gas fees for deleting old code. It's right if you're not a tech kind of guy, no worry. So in rewarding for deleting expired code or expired state is actually something that used to be part of Ethereum. It's called the refit mechanism. And this means that if you deleted it, you get some part of the gas fees that would be spent on making this back. And in essence, this comes down to a block-based feature my research on, but it can't live. It was deleted from Ethereum. It's not in the protocol anymore, and it also can't live together with ERP 1559. ERP 1559 means that the base fee increases, so the gas price increases as there are many transactions. So people could game this, for example. Their strategy would be to put a lot of state into the state transition function, thereby blowing up the base fees, blowing up the gas price, and then after increasing the gas price by themselves, they could get a refund for the amount of gas that would be spent, and they would actually profit from this. So this was meant as quite a difficult prompt, but indeed the rewarding people for deleting old state cannot live together with EIP 1559. There are a few. This was meant as quite a difficult case that maybe you won't be able to get all of the points within time. But for example, doubling the amounts of block space to decrease gas fees is technically possible, but this touches upon the decentralization aspect. The amount of block space is limited to preserve the decentralization, and arbitrarily making more block space means that this will cost you on your front of decentralization. Instead of burning the base fees, send it to dApp developers. This is also not possible because in this case, dApp developers could sponsor you a part of the base fee. So this would be similar to how the second price option worked, what I showed with the miners inserting transactions themselves. DApp developers, if they got all of the base fee back, they could give a part to the user, meaning that your transactions aren't actually as well represented by how it is now in ERP 1559. Point 3 we went through, thank you. MEV is prevented through random ordering of the transactions in a block. This is also not possible because if you do random ordering, it basically incentivizes people to send as many transactions as possible. And if you send more transactions, the odds of your transaction getting included in the place where you want it to be included becomes higher. And this again wastes more block space and you don't actually solve the MEV problem. Setting the base fee fixed per 1,000 blocks makes price estimation easier. In a sense, this is not entirely wrong in like how we do it now. If we set it fixed per 1 block, you could set it fixed. You could think about setting it fixed per transaction if that's possible. But setting it fixed per 1,000 blocks means that there is so much variation in base fee that we see now over the 1 block period. If you put it over 1,000 block, the mechanism wouldn't really work that well anymore. Point 6 we covered. Point 7 was actually a prompt to you. I'm not quite sure how this would work out. Apart from centralization concerns, not splitting liquidity it's a problem if you split liquidity, and you can aggregate AMM on AMM aggregator. But point 7 is a bit of a weird case. And point 8, I don't know if you have heard of rollups, but this is a different topic. Maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't. But if you use rollups on rollups, this basically doesn't work. Rollups compress data, but you can't infinitely keep compressing data. Think about compressing trash. You can't infinitely keep compressing it. At some point, it's just not compressible anymore. So this is why you can't have arbitrarily many rollups on top of each other. Okay, so that was the case. I hope you enjoyed it, and the slides will also be available after. But now we'll go on to some takeaways that you could have from the session. So on the theory front, I'd really like to stress that game theory is a very broad topic, and it studies the strategic behavior of users. So how would you behave given the behavior of other people? A mechanism design then uses reverse game theory to design mechanisms so that the strategy that people will deploy matches with what you've got in mind. And this is again like the holy grail of incentive compatibility that we have. You want your systems that you design to be incentive compatible. For example, a common trade-off people could make here is latency, which we saw in the priority gas auctions, that people incrementally bid higher. You need to be quick for that. You need to compute fast. And this is all value that goes out of the system, that goes to computers, that goes to providers, goes to whatever, versus people just bidding their true bid. what we saw in the second price auction, where the value stays in the system and it accrues to the auctioneer or to users, and you can redistribute it in whatever way you see fit. So incentive compatibility is really what I'd like to stress for you as a thing that you need to think about when designing protocols. And then on the gas market side, the gas market is two-sided. You have the protocol side and the market-based side. And in protocol, all of the gas costs are defined relative to each other, and all of the computations are crammed into these gas costs. There's a base fee that's burned for good reason, as we saw the case. If you would not burn it, it wouldn't work as well. And it's protocol determined. If there's lots of demand, the base fee is high, and if there's less demand, the base fee is low. And this allows you to simply bid your true valuation. So your best strategy is to bid how much you actually see it being worth. And we covered a little bit of maximum extractable value, and MEV can be extracted from your users. So it's very important to make an MEV aware design. This is absolutely necessary when you're thinking about designing your own applications. And MEV can be used as a tool, but you have to be really careful with this. We can see that in liquidation, it works well, but in other situations, it does not work well. So it's really, really important to be MEV aware in this case. And the most important thing to think about is how will strategic users interact with the systems are designed, and make sure that these strategies are, that you think of all of the strategies that people could have, and that these strategies don't undermine your systems. There are no long-run strategies that undermine your systems, and there are also no short-run strategies that undermine your system. Okay, so here I have a slide with some useful links for you if you'd like to go deeper into crypto economics. In the table, you can see some collectives that post, for example, papers, talks, or posts on crypto economics, or on specific topics in crypto economics. And at the bottom, I've included some of the personal blogs. So I'll share these slides later with you if you'd like to see them better. But that was it for now. So I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank Julian for your sharing. And if you have any question, please raise your hand or put your question on the chat or on Slido. I just send you. Yeah. Guy, do you have any question? Hi, Julian. I have the first question for you. Can you recommend for us some book or read or online course about the Ethereum gas? Help us to understand more about the Ethereum.
I don't know of any books or courses that really cover this well. But in these resources that I share here, there's a lot of there's very much crypto economic writing, and yeah, well, I just published some articles about block-based derivatives, which are very applicable to the gas market itself. If you're more interested into MEV or some proposed builder separation, which I mentioned at the beginning, there are lots of other papers sharing thoughts about this. So yeah. Oh, I see that Barnaby, my colleague, just shared something in the chat, which is the Ethereum.org website, which is of course very handy. Thank you. So yeah, there are lots of resources that you could use, and yeah, you can also contact me if you have any questions. Thanks for the question. Okay. I don't know if there are any other questions, but otherwise, feel free to contact me privately afterwards. But it was very nice to see you and to meet you, and thank you for having me, ETHVIETNAM.
Yeah. Thank you, Julian, for the sharing, and thank you guys for joining our event. And after the event, we will send you the survey form to get some feedback and send you our NFT and our ebook. Yeah. Thank you so much for. Thank you, guys.